Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the series where I'm recreating Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic in Minecraft. In the last video, we went ahead and completed the entirety of the MCM. All of the interior buildings have been completed, and last time we finished it off by putting an exterior over the entire thing. So this means there is only two things left to do before this project has been fully completed, where today we're going to be taking a look at one of those, with that being Edwin's mansion. Now I've already gone ahead and completed all of the outlines for this place, as not only is it very small compared to everything that we've taken a look at in MCM, but it's also very tight and claustrophobic. I mean, this is literally a house. We've been moving on from a factory setting to literally a pretty big house, if I have to be honest with you. There's 3 floors counting an attic, as well as a very small basement. However, before I get started on it, there's of course something I need to bring up, as like with everything else in Secret of the Mimic, there's something wrong with this house. And instead of just telling you straight up what it is, I'm going to let you have a guess what it is. Is it A, this house is way lower than it should be? Is it B, this house is rotated in the wrong direction? Or is it C, this house is way too close to the MCM facility? Well, if your answer is all 3 of those, you'd be absolutely correct, because this house does not fit in the same layout as like we see in Secret of the Mimic. With that being said though, none of this actually affects the build itself, as it's really just an aesthetic change, since at the end of the day, we don't really see the elevator going from the bottom floor all the way up to the top. We just realistically teleport from one floor all the way to the other, wherever that might be. But taking a look at the house itself, I'm both a mix of very excited to get started on this, but also slightly nervous at the same time, as I do not build houses in Minecraft very often. I don't know if you've noticed, but this channel is basically dedicated to building fantasy bear restaurants at this point, and I could not tell you the last time I just built a house. So let's just get right into it and not waste any more time and get started building the mansion. I'm sure I'm not the only one who plays Minecraft every single day of their lives and just doesn't build normal generic houses. I'm not saying this is a normal generic house, but just like houses in general, that is not my interest. So building this was very different compared to everything else. Like I said, I cannot remember the last time I built something that wasn't related to Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, I have gone on in the past, and even in this series, that I do eventually want to move away from FNAF, but, you know, I don't think that's going to be in the near future. I really want to try at the end of the year to do something different. I'm not going to say what that is just yet, but I do have an idea. But as of right now, it is nice doing something a little bit different, and I guess that's what made this game a lot more fun as well, compared to every other FNAF game. I still really liked the PizzaPlex, as it wasn't just a normal pizzeria, but this game has nothing to do with any of that. In fact, the closest that really is the R&D section, which even then is a under construction FNAF 1 pizzeria. Everything about this project has been completely different from anything I would do before. There's no pizzerias, there's no Freddy really, there's very little imagery of Freddy in Secret of the Mimic as well. And just being able to build this costume manor as well as this house has really expanded my block palette, the blocks I use to build, the way I build things. Obviously this is a recreation, so I have to follow along what I am doing, but even then, it just gets me more interested to figure out what other things I would be able to build. Obviously, I'm interested in more game franchises than just Five Nights at Freddy's, but, you know, I don't expect any of you to know that, because that's just what I focus my channel around. But like I said, I do want to do something non-FNAF related later on, and I'm sure that I would be able to translate some of the methods that I've learned in these games and transfer it over to those games. Now, again, it really does depend, as different games might have a different art style. Some games might be a lot more cartoonish, where it's not as realistic. And by that, I don't mean that's, you know, not sci-fi or anything, but just like the way structures are made, for example. FNAF has always been down to earth, basically believable. And I'm hesitating saying that because obviously there are some times where it does stretch those boundaries, but when you compare it to other games where it just makes no sense whatsoever, no matter what way you think about it, it can change how a build works and my thought process getting into it. This is about to be even more apparent in the next episode once I start working on the terrain, as I'm no longer going to be focusing on a structure. This is the last episode for that. After this, all of the main structures have been fully added, the factory, the house, everything like that. Next is just terrain work, and I've never made a video just focused on landscape. It's not something that seems all that special, but looking at it and seeing how different it is, I think it's going to be a very nice break from it, and is going to be a very nice touch to the build, because again, this is the first time we've properly seen the exterior to a FNAF location, or just a location in general, you know what I'm on about. So it's going to be fun being able to recreate it all, despite how time consuming or difficult it might be. It's something I'm really excited to get working on, and we are going to be seeing a little bit of that right after finishing the house. We're in a bit of a different spot compared to what we just saw before I got started building. Obviously the outlines were connected to the elevator, but here I think I've placed it in a more accurate spot to where it is compared to the factory itself. Now what's also weird is what this house looks like without a cover, as since we don't really get to see what the exterior looks like in full detail, there are snippets of what the exterior could look like with a little bit of these walls and roofs here, but as for the exterior, it doesn't exist, so I'm going to have to use my imagination a little bit, which I'm excited for. But before I get into that, let's go ahead and take a look at the interior itself. Already, I can see that I forgot to add 2 signs on the side of this door, so let's go ahead and fix that quickly. There we go, now the build is completed. But you can see the shades of green that I was talking about, and though I don't build houses in Minecraft very often, I do really like using green, as there are a lot of green blocks to use in Minecraft. It's easy to texture, it's easy to look good, and there's also many blocks that complement it, such as the spruce logs that line across the walls and the floors. But just because the house looks very cozy, it doesn't mean that it's neat, as this is honestly a very messy house. I'm not entirely sure what's going on in here, but from the looks of it, it seems that if you abandon a house for long enough, different pipes will just start spawning along the walls of the place. This is absolutely trashed. There are so many different things that you would not expect to find in a house, like a locker here. Of course, some of it is just for gameplay purposes, so I can't really fault it there. But it is amazing how there's just hooks and wires hanging from the doorways, which is not only extremely dangerous, but not something I have in my own house, if I have to be honest. But honestly, this house also has some of my favorite forms of building techniques in Minecraft, with it being very tight and claustrophobic. I know it can be difficult to add in intricate details when you're building in such a small scale, but it honestly works in my favor sometimes because I can only use a certain amount of blocks per object, and your brain just fills in the rest of the space for you to imagine what it could be, for example. But going back to some of the texturing with how green blocks work, you can see how I was able to not only do lime terracotta and green terracotta, but also mixing in green concrete powder as well as moss blocks work really well when it comes to adding in some texturing details. In fact, I really wanted to just go throughout the entire build and just start adding in these blocks around it, as it works really well, but unfortunately that's just not what the build looks like. I really just see a blank wall like this and it's like, easily I can make this a lot more interesting, but unfortunately it really just stuck to like small parts at the top of the ceiling where there's grime coming down from the roof. I can only imagine it's going to be even more interesting once I eventually add in the Mimic itself to roam around this house. However, that again will be something I take a look at once I start adding in all of the gameplay features. Speaking of gameplay though, there are also some times where we need to use a max level Phaz wrench to open up some of these doors. Not Phaz wrench, data diver, but these are really just other rooms inside the house where it just serves as a gameplay mechanic. You get one of the tapes to put in the story machine, where it then leads over to David's room. Now I'm going to let the attic speak for itself, as it is once again just a complete mess of boxes everywhere, but there is an interesting scale model of the exterior to the MCM, which we don't actually see in game, but it's an early version of what it was going to look like in the game development side of things. Now as for Edwin's office, it's definitely seen better days, but this was probably the most fun room to put together, I gotta be honest, because as we can see here, there was a bit of an explosion incident going on. Like half of the room is pretty much missing, where there's just scaffolding and supports to the left, holding up what is little of the roof left together. But then of course the last part of the mansion is behind this bookshelf here, where Scooby-Doo style it slides over to the side. That way we get access to the security room, where then we start the chase sequence away from the mimic. We run across the attic and then make it back to the exact same elevator again at the very beginning. But with that quick tour out of the way with, let's now go ahead and take a look at the exterior that I'm going to be building next, as while I could just leave it at this, we technically don't see what the exterior looks like. It's not going to be a nice view in terms of a Minecraft map where we're all the way over there and then we just see this in the distance. Again, we do see a little bit of what the facade looks like from the parking lot, but it's all shadowed out in grey, so I'm going to have to use my imagination and the little bits that we actually do get to see, so that way I'm able to add a full exterior to this house and make it look a bit more polished. Long story short, and to spoil a bit of what's to come, it took more than one attempt to get this right. You know, there's a few fancy terms for describing Minecraft builds, but one of them is just simply, it's not good. I don't like this. Okay, you know what? I have an idea, but I don't know how popular it's going to be. It's been a while since I've seen this menu. Alright, so you're probably wondering what I'm doing in Help Wanted, which is a completely different game to Secret of the Mimic. However, I had a thought. This game right here, the Trick or Treat minigame, because in this minigame, there's a house, and I wonder if I could get away with making this house be Edwin. Hello? I wonder if I could get away with this being Edwin's house. Now, before you say anything, I know this is a completely different game, and Edwin was most likely not even a character that existed back then. However, there are a few similarities between Help Wanted, FNAF 4, and Edwin's house. So I wonder if I could get away with not building this one for one, obviously, because the shape is nowhere the same, but at least taking inspiration from it. So heading back over to Minecraft for attempt number 2, I once again started building with a brand new color scheme, but just like last time, I did not like how it turned out. I've been struggling for a few hours now, so I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and do something that I know I'm good at, and that of course is outlining. I don't know why I didn't decide to do this immediately. I thought I could just, you know, I guess freehand a house, despite the fact that I'm never good at this, I don't do this very often, and I need to somehow make the exterior look like the facade that we see at the top of the hill, while also trying to make it actually fit around all of the different rooms. But it also actually has a full frame around the house to give me a better idea of what it's going to look like once it's actually been built. Once again, outlines, extremely underrated, need to do it all the time. Instead of using my own imagination or taking inspiration from another game, I decided to go back to the original source material in Secret of the Mimic and use the small bits that we see of the outside, with those being the 2 wooden walls with the blue roofs. I think this actually turned out really well after the fact, which who would have thought, I guess. I really wanted to keep it within the same general size and shape as the original build interior. However, I did decide to expand it a little bit, but I think the ending result turned out much better because of it. Alright, I actually got there in the end and actually finished a house. The other 2 versions, I didn't even get halfway done with them because I just had to take a step back and look at it and just go, I didn't like this. But this one, however, I actually really like how it turned out. Now, I did have to take some creative freedoms with it, obviously, with the block choice, the shape of the house, and all that such. I tried my absolute best to recreate the shape that we see on the silhouette, and I think I did a really good job with it. Now, with that being said, obviously, like with most Minecraft houses, there is a lot of empty space underneath the roof, but that doesn't really matter too much because it still gets the general points across of the important parts, such as Edwin's office, where we actually see the outside here. There's a little bit of the roof around it, but it still has the exposed parts when needed. Again, realistically, this would be the part of the house that we're supposed to be looking towards if it were rotated in the right direction, which would make a big difference, especially that we get to see the front doorway and the part of Edwin's office right there, which itself could even look onto MCM. But aside from that though, the exterior for the time being is relatively bland. I didn't go all out with it just yet. I'm going to wait until I do the surrounding landscape, where right now I just have a small cobblestone path that leads to a driveway where I assume Edwin would park his car. There's no visible garage here. I assume there isn't one at all. But what is actually seen is this tree right here, which is a different type of tree compared to what I'm usually used to building, which are those spruce taller trees that we see all the way down there. This is your more traditional, larger oak tree, and again, trees are really fun to make, and I'm really happy with how this one turned out. There's of course going to be more trees scattered along the landscape later on, but because we're able to see this all the way from the parking lot, I want to make sure this is unobstructed as possible. And I guess since I just spoiled what I'm going to be working on next, I'm not done just yet. I'm not just going to leave it here. It would be really weird to just have a floating house that is completely disconnected from everything else. So what I want to finish up this video by doing is actually adding in all of the terrain to connect the house to the MCM. So this path right here leads up a long driveway that eventually connects back to the right side of this driveway over here. Speaking of which, this is what the road itself looks like. I've gone ahead and outlined this just because I want some sort of reference to follow. Obviously, it is a bit difficult, if not impossible, to outline natural terrain as it's not a consistent shape like a rectangle box of a building. So somehow I'm going to have to find a way to make the terrain link from this Y level all the way down here and blend all the way up to this top part right here. With that said, I do have an idea on how I'm going to do this. However, I can't imagine that a lot of people are going to be happy with me. But let's go ahead and see what happens. That's right, I did the entire thing by hand. No mods were used in the making of this landscape, just me and my right mouse button placing down every single block here, which is time consuming in fairness. It did take just under 2 hours, but you should know my stance on using mods for building at this point. There's only so much that I want a mod to do instead of taking up the entire build for me. What I will be doing though is replacing each one of these solid blocks with different textures later on, that way it actually looks like proper landscape, but for the time being, imagine each one of these different colors as an outline, which will then represent different parts of the terrain. And 3, 2, 1, all done. The texturing is now in, and I mean, it makes a hell of a difference. It's no longer just a mess of 3 different types of terracotta. We actually have proper terrain now fully set up. Now obviously it's missing a lot of things like all of the trees, there's a few rocks that jut out, and I could probably go ahead and add in some extra grass. That way there's some more layering to all of the different landscapes. However, in terms of the environment itself, this is how the rest of it is going to look like. There's 3 different types of terrain throughout the entire place. Obviously, this all takes place in a mountain range, so it's going to have lots of these upward hills like this, where it's a mix of the grass green, there's some more rocks where it's mostly made out of stone, deep slate, and tuff, but then we have some darker rock, which is all made out of different types of deep slate and basalt. Again, all of this was built by hand. I've just used World Edit to paint it over for me. That way it can look a lot more natural while still having all of the different color schemes needed. These are the 3 different templates that I used to make up the landscape texturing, with the first one here being what replaced the green terracotta, this one right here being the one that replaced the white terracotta, and the final one being the one that replaced the cyan terracotta. So each one is a 12 by 12 square, so that way there's more mixed details and I can get a lot more texturing inside of each one. Then all I need to do is copy it with World Edit, then select a region and replace a certain block with the clipboard. Like I've been saying since episode 1, I have been using World Edit to help me out with this project, and this is probably the best example of that, and in fact it is the first time that I've had to use it in such a large scale like this. Either way, I think this turned out really well, and again is going to look much better once we actually add in all of those final details. Let's go ahead and get that done with right now. And now there we have it. Once again, this makes a massive difference compared to what we just had. I added in all of the different terrain pieces all around the place, and I tried to add in the exact number of trees as seen in-game. Now with that being said, I did add in some additional ones around the house, as even though we don't see them from the parking lot, some of them do appear once we're inside of Edwin's office, like a few rocks, some trees, but I did want to keep this tree unobstructed, that way we would still be able to see it from a distance. But with all of that, you can now start to see what the rest of the terrain is eventually going to look like, and honestly, even though this is a tiny chunk compared to what eventually is going to be added, I think this is a really good start and makes for a really amazing view. And from this angle, the view is just so grand. I mean, obviously the mansion looks a lot bigger than we see it in-game, but that's because A, what we see in-game isn't the actual model of it, and B, this is a full-sized house. But if I wanted to, what I could do is lower my field of view and try to recreate the menu screen. Let me go ahead and set the time to night. I mean, obviously the lighting isn't there because I have night vision turned on, and if I turn it off, it's going to be way too dark, but I mean, you can see what I'm going for. Obviously, we can't go inside the vans, so this is the closest we're going to get, but you can see what I'm going for here. I still think this looks really good. With the addition of the terrain, it definitely adds to the house itself, which is definitely starting to grow on me. I definitely think the environment helps out a lot. I mean, it's obviously a lot better than just a floating house, but with that being said, this is definitely a very strong start, and I'm very proud of how it all turned out. But let me know what you think about it down in the comments, as this episode ended up being quite different compared to the rest of the series. Not only are we no longer working on the main factory itself, this is a completely separate build, but also adding in some terrain work is something that I've never really focused on a single video, and I hope that I explained my processes well enough and to give you a general idea of how I go about making builds such as this one. This is another one of those great examples where even though I'm recreating a game in Minecraft, nothing is always going to be the same, as I've had to change my building style completely for this, whether it be the interior to the house or the exterior of the mansion, and then to the landscaping itself with all of the trees and vegetation scattered on top of it. It can be a very time-consuming and sometimes difficult process, but the ending result is always really satisfying to work towards, especially when you get to take in the entire view once it's all been completed. But speaking of which, that is the last building to be added to Secret of the Mimic. Now that we've completed the mansion and the MCM, the only thing that is left to add is the terrain around the entire environment, which is of course what we're going to be working on as the finale of this series. There are some smaller details left to be added on top of that, however, in terms of the main part of the gameplay map, this is where it's going to leave it. And of course, once the building side of the project has been completed, I'm then going to get started working on the gameplay side of things, which I'm honestly just as excited to get started on. So make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with all notifications turned on, so that way you don't miss out on when I do get started on that, and can also help the channel to continue to grow. But with that being said, thank you everyone so much for watching, and I will of course see you in my next video. I genuinely cannot wait to read the comments on this video. I just know there are some people who are seething at the way that I went ahead and did this. In fact, I wonder actually, how many blocks did I place to do this? Green terracotta, 11,000. That doesn't seem right. That feels like way more than it should be, but you know, whatever works. I got it done in the end.